poxviruses are virulent. And so there would be guilt by association with regard to the poxvirus. But whatever may be the case, we have developed knock-in mice for mutations of the FMF locus, so that perhaps we can look at some of these issues. And so this shown here is a picture of some of the knock-in mice that we have. So these are mice in which we have knocked in the V726A mutation at the FMF locus. You can see the wild-type littermates are shown here, heterozygotes here, but the homozygous mutant mice are small and have skin rash. If you euthanize these mice, it turns out that they have massive lymphadenopathy and splenomegaly, disruption of the architecture of the spleen. They spontaneously develop arthritis. In fact, if you section the involved joints, they have a lot of polyps in the involved joints. When we have looked at these mice in terms of the phenotype and looking at genetic ways that one can modulate the phenotype, I'll just show you this one slide here. So on the upper left-hand side, you can see this part of the flow cytometry image is a group of cells, a high percentage of cells in the peripheral blood that are CD11b positive and have high side scatter. These are granulocytes, basically. So these these mice have a leukocytosis, granulocytosis. If you breed these mice to a wild-type background, that's what you get. If you breed them to an IL-1 receptor knockout background, you can see that that goes away. And in fact, the phenotype is ameliorated almost completely by breeding these mice onto an IL-1 receptor knockout background. Similarly, if one, if one looks at these mice and compares them between wild type and an ASC knockout, remember ASC is that adapter protein that pyrin interacts with. Again, you can ameliorate the phenotype by knocking out ASC on the background. However, if you compare the wild type background with a knockout of NLRP3, which is another protein that is mutated in periodic fevers and is involved in IL-1 activation, you don't have an effect, suggesting that pyrin has an independent effect in terms of IL-1 activation. In any event, so one can maybe take that a little bit to the clinic. Now, many of you may know that colchicine is the standard therapy for FMF. And so for most patients, that's actually what we use to treat FMF is colchicine. But in some patients, for a variety of reasons, either they don't respond to colchicine or they have bad side effects. So going back to our patient from Baghdad, Iraq, a young man, 18 years old, homozygous for the M694B mutation, had diffuse amyloid deposits. Here are images from his kidney biopsies. This is stained with Congo red, looked at under conventional light, looked at under polarizing light, showing the amyloid deposits, and then with monoclonal antibodies against AA. He also had significant deposition in his gastrointestinal tract, as well as in his heart. He was the guy that was in heart failure and, in fact, had malabsorption and couldn't eat anything, had chronic diarrhea because of his amyloid deposits in his GI tract. So anyway, we set out on an effort to try to bring things around for this guy. And one theory that was operative at that time, which turns out to be true, is that amyloid actually is a dynamic process in which you have both deposition and resorption of amyloid. And so if one can totally, or at least markedly, reduce the rate of deposition, then eventually the resorptive process can take over and the amyloid deposits will actually diminish over time. So in any case, we used anakinra, the IL-1 receptor antagonist in this patient. And you can see that at least during the times that he was on it, that he was septic during this particular period, and so he was off the anakinra. But it did actually control his acute phase reactants, and we were, over time, able to see a marked improvement in him. And this is this patient, the picture taken 2 days ago, so he's in fact doing well. And I can tell you that when this slide was prepared, he was in the ICU of the NIH, and we were really worried about whether he would even make it through the end of that year. So I think that there is some motility in IL-1 inhibition in these patients. Well, I'd like to change gears now and talk about another recurrent fever syndrome. And this is a recurrent fever syndrome that I was made aware of while we were looking for the gene for FMF. And here is where the real test will occur. Will the video work or will it not work? But just as background, so this lady here gave me a phone call over the holiday season in 1996. And she's from the backcountry of Louisiana. And I could hear dogs barking in the background of the voicemail message. She was calling because her husband had just died in the Shreveport VA hospital of what was said to be FMF. And I hope that we can play this because I think that it really illustrates that not only is it good to have astute clinicians, but it's really good to have an astute mom. So let's see if we can make this go.
We were just unable to figure out what to do. I mean, it had all these symptoms, fever, pain, and it just escalated into the point that eventually he...
Well, we'll wait a minute to see whether or not we can rectify the technical situation. But not too long. Okay, so in any case, this lady here, who, as I said, is from rural Louisiana, had a husband who had died of a disease that was said to be FMF. And she had done a little bit of reading about it, and it turned out that her daughter was also having the same kind of attacks that her husband had before he died. And so the doctors at the VA hospital had told her that it was FMF. She had read up a little bit on FMF and had found that, yes, FMF is supposed to be recessively inherited, and it seemed to her that FMF was, or that her family's condition anyway, was dominantly inherited. This is not good to have a blank screen here. So in any event, it was dominantly inherited, and therefore she felt that perhaps it would be good to see us at the NIH and that perhaps we could help out with this. So in any case, I wanted to show you this simply as an illustration of the fact that you do really have to listen to your patients, and especially nowadays with the internet, people are quite well educated, and it's really an important thing. What would have been on the right-hand side of this slide is actually an image of pedigree of another family that I was referred while we were looking for the FMF gene. And this pedigree is from a young woman, 27 years old, of Irish, actually she was Irish, who was referred to me with what was said to be Hibernian fever. Hibernian fever had been described a few years before in a large family of mixed Irish and Scottish ancestry. Patients were seen in Great Britain, and so they thought that the hot-blooded Irish side of the family must be responsible for it, and they called it Hibernian fever. So in any event, and actually back at that time, the next slide would show the shipwrecks of the Spanish Armada. And so the Spanish Armada, in 1588, had set sail to overthrow Queen Elizabeth. And what had happened was that there was a big storm, and a lot of the ships of the Spanish Armada got shipwrecked in Ireland. And because a lot of the Spanish were Catholic, some of the Spanish sailors were actually taken in Ireland. And since some of the Spanish sailors actually were of Jewish background, although they had been forced to convert back at the time of the Inquisition, there was the concern that perhaps, the theory that perhaps people with recurrent fever syndromes in Ireland with this Hibernian fever might actually have a variant of FMF. So in any case, that was the theory. When we found the gene for FMF, of course, we could look at our Irish family and see whether or not they had perhaps a different mutation at the FMF locus that would have been dominantly inherited. But as it turned